Everyone, this week, now that the ladder reset, I decided that I wanted to try something a little different, and I decided to try the Cone of Horns deck because I actually had a couple in my budget account already. So, Cone of Horns is a 8 mana spell that transforms all your minions in your action bar, which is your hand, and your deck into 0 cost Gorehorns. Gorehorn is a 3 mana, 3/3 with backstab 2 that when it attacks, it gets +1/+1. So the point of this deck is to try to survive until you can cast Cone of Horns, and then drop a bunch of Gorehorns onto the board, and just try to win with a swarm of 3/3 backstabbers that are pretty difficult to deal with for most decks. Um, so the deck, basically, for the card choices, we chose Inner Focus. Inner Focus is very good with Gorehorn because it allows it to immediately backstab, where it will grow to a 4/4 and deal 5 damage right away because it doesn't get the +1/+1 until after the attack. Next up, we have Phoenix Fire, just good removal. A lot of this deck is about just surviving, so we're just trying to survive until we can get to the Cone of Horns. Similar thing with Onyx Bear Seal, we can answer any big minions, just anything real problematic at any range. Twin Strikes will just cycle, allowing us to draw more cards, and it will kill if we get swarmed a little bit. It helps us deal with multiple minions. Ancestral Divination is a card you don't see much. It is 4 mana and draws a card for each minion you have on the battlefield. So if you mainly want to use it after you play Cone of Horns, drop a bunch of 0 cost Gorehorns, then you play Ancestral Divination, and you can reload and play a bunch more 0 cost Gorehorns. And note that Cone of Horns does draw you 3 cards, so you usually will have some amount of Gorehorns right away. And because of the way Cone of Horns works, we wanted to have a decent mix of minions and spells. A lot of the Songhai minions trigger off of spells, so we had to find this balance. So that's why we went with the spell mixture we did. We wanted to have a decent amount of spells, but also have room for our minions that can be transformed by the Cone of Horns. So for minions, we also went with survivability for the most part. We went with 3 Azure Heralds, which will heal us for 3, 2 Healing Mystics, which will heal us. We went with a Zao, because that functions as a minion and a spell. When it dies, it will give us a spell with its cost reduced by 1, so it allows us to trigger the Chakri Avatar, it allows us to trigger the Four Winds Magi, but it also functions as a minion that can transform if we play the Cone of Horns. One of the key cards in this deck is Adjudicator, and this is a card that many people probably haven't seen because it's relatively niche, but it lowers the cost of all our spells in the action bar by 1. So with a decent spell count, we can usually get a decent bit of reduction from this. And if you play Cone of Horns, if you have Cone of Horns in your hand, reducing it to 7 is a pretty big deal. And for this reason, you often will want to keep Cone of Horns early if you have an Adjudicator. So this deck often has hands where you're holding on to high cost spells that you can't play because you want them to be reduced by the Adjudicators you have in your hand. So it makes it rather difficult to play at times. You could try to play it out like a normal Songhai deck, but I think you'd just end up with a weaker version of the more streamlined Songhais. So I think you need to play around the combo for this to work correctly. So Adjudicator is pretty key to that because being able to cast it a turn earlier is a very big deal in a lot of cases. Key Beholder, it's a ranged minion and it locks something down. It basically tries to buy you a turn, and they have to deal with it right away, otherwise it can ping off a lot of minions. Lantern Fox give us some more Phoenix Fires to control the board, and Four Winds Magi will help to gain us some life and deal a little bit of extra damage. So we're very much just trying to stall the game out, trying not to die for a while, trying to keep our hand count, a card count in our hand pretty full, and then drop the Cone of Horns. So that's what this deck's designed to do. Now, the weaknesses of this deck are things that can kill all our Gorehorns. So sometimes you're going to want to hold back the Gorehorns. Magma with Mechanto Warbeast is very difficult at times. Plasma Storm is very difficult. Frostburn out of Vanar can be very difficult. Those are the main ones that you'll see. Holy Immolation can be difficult, but that's a little bit easier to play around most of the time when you reach that point. So anything that can just clear a bunch of goal horns at once, because this deck wins by swarming the board. So that's the deck tech. I'll give you a link to the deck list um, in the description, so you can play around with it. One thing you might want to go up on is Ancestral Divinations, because it's very good after you play Cone of Horns, and you may want to just make this a 2 of Cone of Horns. I decided to go with 3 because I wanted to play it in as many games as possible to see how it works, but it might be better if you don't, because you don't want to draw 2 copies almost ever. You don't want to play 2 copies. Using it as a 3-card draw is just not very powerful for 8 mana. So you'd rather have another Ancestral Divination in that case. So it might be better to go down to 2 copies. So I'm going to show you a couple games, and it didn't perform overly well. I probably went about half my games, but I'll show you a couple that where it worked out.